Welcome to our channel. Today we're diving into the extraordinary life of Danny Thomas, a comedy legend and a humanitarian whose work left a lasting impact on the entertainment world and beyond. From his rise to fame as a beloved entertainer, to his groundbreaking sitcom, Make Room for Daddy, and his lifelong dedication to founding St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Thomas's story is one of talent, resilience, and compassion. Danny Thomas was born on January 6, 1914, in the small farming community of Deerfield, Michigan. That might surprise people who only knew him as the quintessential urban television dad, always on stage or on screen. But his roots were humble and his beginnings uniquely complicated. His parents, Lebanese immigrants who spoke Arabic at home, originally named him Muad Yaqub. They soon realized, however, that navigating early 20th century America with a foreign-sounding name could be challenging. The confusion deepened when his mother mistakenly believed that his name had been changed to Alonsus after his baptism, and she sometimes used that on official documents. The father, hoping to simplify matters, opted to change the family name to Jacobs, morphing Muad Yaqub into Amos Jacobs. The young boy, who would eventually become Danny Thomas, found himself with a new identity, one that felt more American to those around him. Yet among his closest friends, people like Frank Sinatra, he was still just Jake. Growing up, Amos, as he was then called, was immersed in the rich stories of his Lebanese heritage. His father, Charles Jacobs, made his living in various ways, from peddling dry goods to collecting scrap metal. Despite the hardships, Charles thrived on spinning yarns about the family's homeland, tales of Lebanon, glimpses into his life as a peddler, and family lore that left young Amos transfixed. These stories served an unexpected purpose. They later formed the bedrock of Amos's comedic material. He developed a unique flair for weaving ethnic jokes and diverse accents into his routines, a skill that would captivate audiences. After finally saving up enough money to buy a horse farm in Michigan, he lost it all in a poker game, forcing the entire family to move to Toledo, Ohio, where Charles worked in a factory. Yet that same risk-taking spirit and the sense of humor that helped them survive would become part of Danny's comedic perspective on life. In Toledo, Danny encountered an incredibly diverse cultural landscape. He picked up accents from Irish neighbors, Jewish shopkeepers, and fellow Lebanese families. He had a natural ear and an instinctive ability to mimic. By the time he was in his early teens, he could switch fluidly between Yiddish expressions, Irish phrases, and the distinctive melodies of Lebanese colloquialisms. That gift for observation would, in later years, help define his comedic brand. One of his biggest inspirations during that formative period was his Uncle Tony T. Simon and Aunt Julia, with whom he lived off and on. His uncle would travel for work, and Danny often followed, gleaning comedic insights from the local jokes and banter wherever they went. By 12, Danny already glimpsed the possibilities of show business. He would sneak into burlesque houses or local vaudeville revues, transfixed by the idea that people could actually earn a living making others laugh. His favorite performer was Abe Reynolds, a dialect comic who interwoven Russian, Jewish, and other ethnic accents into comedic monologues. It was from performers like these that Danny saw how a well-timed accent or a well-executed comedic persona could bring entire audiences to their knees in laughter. This was an era when comedic styles were shifting. The old vaudeville system was on the wane, radio was on the rise, and some performers were making early transitions to the brand new medium of television. At 12, Danny formed a high school act with his brother, calling themselves Ray and Amos Jacobs. They tried a blend of song and dance routines, comedic patter, and some variety elements, but the act fizzled out when Danny dropped out of high school at 15. Like many Americans during the Great Depression, he had to find a way to earn money. The country was in economic freefall, with staggering unemployment rates, breadlines, and families struggling to pay rent. Public amusements, from movies to cheap vaudeville, remained some of the few affordable escapes for ordinary people, and that's where Danny saw his shot. He moved around doing odd jobs, and at one point ended up in Rochester, New York, where he sold candy at a burlesque theater. This was an essential real-world education in how stage performance worked. He observed everything, from comedic timing to audience psychology. Even so, life was precarious. He felt the weight of familial and financial pressures, and at 17 he decided to go to Detroit, living with his uncle David A.A.R. Detroit, at that time, was the Motor City, pulsing with factory jobs, assembly lines, and union activism, but also hosting an energetic nightlife with plenty of clubs in which an entertainer might get his big break. Danny's journey into radio kicked off at WBC on a program called the Happy Hour Club. And although radio might seem old-fashioned now in the early 20th century, it was a technological marvel that connected small-town Americans to the big world. This was a new medium that needed fresh voices, comedians, dramatists, variety hosts, and Danny recognized it as a path to a real career. It was also on WBC's show that he met Rose Marie Mantell, who would become his wife. As a young married couple, they faced the same uncertainties any couple would, but with the added financial and logistical hardships of the Great Depression. Then came amateur night after amateur night, as Danny tried to showcase his comedic chops, sometimes winning applause, sometimes going home dejected. Eventually, he landed an actual paying gig at a local beer garden, performing for patrons who sipped on low-alcohol beers like 3.2 beer and near beer. $2 a night was hardly a gold mine, but it was a start. As time passed, gigs began coming in with more regularity. MC roles at small clubs, radio commercials, bit parts on local radio dramas. When he and Rosemarie had their first baby, a daughter who would later become Marlo Thomas, herself a star of the TV show That Girl, financial anxieties soared. His wife pleaded with him to find stable work, maybe start a grocery store or some other safer business. At one particularly low moment, Danny prayed to St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. He promised that if he found real success, he would build a shrine to that saint in gratitude. That break came in the early 1940s, when Danny moved to Chicago. By then, Chicago was more than just the second city. It was a bustling hub for radio programming, live theater, jazz music, and comedic variety shows that drew huge crowds. Armed with his facility for accents and comedic impressions, Danny managed to land roles in network radio programs and in commercials. Between these small but steady jobs, he nurtured his stage persona in local clubs, slowly building a following. Still, the competition was fierce and job security scarce. By the time he was booked at the 5100 Club in Chicago, the city's nightlife was in full swing. Al Capone was no longer around, but the legacy of Prohibition-era entertainment had left behind a labyrinth of nightclubs looking for fresh acts to headline. Danny accepted the gig, though he was uneasy about performing for people from his hometown who might drop in. Perhaps worried about being recognized, he started calling himself Danny Thomas, an alias he cobbled together from a combination of his brother's names and a playful nod to stage tradition. Once Danny took on this new name, something seemed to click. It was catchier, more commercial than Amos Jacobs, and it allowed him to develop a fresh comedic voice. He experimented by blending comedic anecdotes from his upbringing, spicing them with a bit of self-deprecating humor, and then surprising the audience with a perfectly executed accent. He dubbed these final punchlines treacle cutters, comedic twists that popped up after a sentimental or heartfelt moment in the setup. The innovation made him stand out. Meanwhile, in the audience, an influential agent from the William Morris Agency, Abe Lasvogel, took notice. Lasvogel knew star potential when he saw it. Recognizing that some of Danny's ethnic material might need finessing to appeal to broader audiences, Lasvogel guided him toward a more universal comedic style. Under the agent's tutelage, Danny found himself booked at ever higher-end venues: the Chez Paris in Chicago, La Martinique in New York, the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, and eventually even the prestigious Radio City Music Hall. By 1944, Lasvogel had secured Danny a role as Jerry Dingle the postman on Fanny Brice's radio show, The Baby Snooks Show. That was a real coup. Fanny Brice was a towering comedic figure, best known for her Baby Snooks character and for being the inspiration behind the musical Funny Girl. This was the era when comedic radio shows were some of the most popular entertainment in America. If you landed a regular part, that meant exposure to millions of listeners. Soon, big Hollywood studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Columbia Pictures also got interested in Danny. He signed short-term contracts, dabbled in film acting, and by 1947, he was in a few movies each year, culminating in his most notable film appearances, the Jazz Singer remake and I'll See You in My Dreams, where he co-starred with Doris Day. Interestingly, Danny's refusal to get a nose job, a common practice in Hollywood, where studios sometimes pushed stars to alter their looks, ultimately hindered him from securing long-term contracts with the major studios. Danny's foray into the brand new medium of television came as he was juggling gigs in nightclubs and film sets. His first big TV appearance was as a host on NBC's 4-Star Review, a variety show with fast-paced sketches, dance acts, juggling routines, and comedic segments. Variety shows were popular at that moment, but they didn't quite align with Danny's more narrative-driven comedic style. He liked to develop a story, lull the audience into a sense of familiarity, and then break the tension with a punchline. Variety shows, with their staccato pacing, rarely gave him that space. After one season, he left and returned to clubs for a year, continuing to hone his comedic technique. By the early 1950s, the still young ABC network was looking for new programming that could compete against juggernauts like NBC and CBS. They saw promise in Danny Thomas. Teaming up with writer Mel Shavelson, Danny created a sitcom concept that drew upon a relatable domestic scenario. When he came home from traveling, his kids had to move out of the master bedroom where they slept with their mother, making room for Daddy. That premise grew into the show, officially titled Make Room for Daddy, premiering in 1953. Critics initially questioned how well a sitcom anchored by a Lebanese-American comic on a struggling network could do, but the program turned into a sleeper hit. Audiences loved the warm, comedic moments interspersed with Danny's witty banter and small bursts of variety performance. The show earned an Emmy for Best New Show, boosting Danny's national profile. In those first years, Jean Hagen, fresh off an Oscar nomination for Singin' in the Rain, played Margaret, Danny's wife, while Sherry Jackson and Rusty Hamer played the children, Terry and Rusty. Though the ensemble clicked on screen, tensions brewed behind the scenes. Danny found Jean Hagen difficult to work with, believing she disdained him personally. After 3 seasons, she chose to exit the show, which meant the writers had to figure out how to handle her abrupt departure. In a landmark television decision, they wrote Margaret's death into the storyline, making her the first continuing character in network TV history to be killed off. The subsequent season opened with that twist, giving the show a surprisingly emotional undercurrent for a sitcom. While Jean Hagen acted in various projects afterward, Her career never fully regained its momentum, and she ultimately stepped away from Hollywood due to health issues. In its final season on ABC, the widowed Danny Williams met a widow, Kathy O'Hara, a nurse played by Marjorie Lord, whose spirited presence proved a perfect foil for Danny's comedic style. When the show moved to CBS in 1957, Kathy O'Hara became his new wife, and Make Room for Daddy picked up even more steam, replacing I Love Lucy in the schedule. That time slot guaranteed a massive audience. The show was soon a mainstay in the top 10 ratings, catapulting Danny Thomas into the upper echelons of TV stardom. He stayed in that comfortable spot until 1964, when he voluntarily ended Make Room for Daddy, feeling that it had run its course and wanting to explore other creative avenues. Meanwhile, Danny had formed his own production company, Danny Thomas Productions, under the watchful guidance of Abe Lastfogel. This was the golden age of television, and independent production companies were becoming influential. Desilu, formed by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, was one example. Danny Thomas Productions became another. Its first success outside of Danny's own show was The Real McCoys, a rural sitcom starring Walter Brennan and Richard Crenna. A comedic look at a West Virginia family who inherits a farm in California, the show found wide appeal, running for multiple seasons. Danny's production company then launched The Andy Griffith Show, which remains a cultural icon of wholesome American television. Danny's Make Room for Daddy is also where Andy Griffith's character, Sheriff Andy Taylor, first appeared, leading to the spin-off that eventually overshadowed its parent show. In addition, the production company was instrumental in developing The Dick Van Dyke Show, another landmark in TV comedy that balanced comedic sketches with glimpses into the personal life of a television writer. As Danny's career matured, he made countless guest appearances on popular programs, including his daughter Marlo Thomas's breakout series, That Girl. In the 1960s, he also starred in a handful of TV specials, and for one season, hosted the Danny Thomas Hour, a mix of variety and drama on NBC. He tried returning to the weekly sitcom format in 1986 with One Big Happy Family, playing an ex-vaudevillian who inherits his late brother's children. But by then, television had changed, and the show never reached the level of success that Make Room for Daddy had enjoyed. Regardless, Danny Thomas's name remained a draw, and he continued to tour with comedic contemporaries like Milton Berle and Sid Caesar in a live review titled The Legends of Comedy. Perhaps the most enduring achievement of Danny Thomas's life was not in entertainment at all, but in philanthropy. True to his promise, Danny never forgot his vow to St. Jude. Beginning in the early 1950s, he began raising money for what would become St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. The idea was radical at the time. A hospital that treated children for catastrophic illnesses, regardless of race, religion, or their family's ability to pay. Memphis was selected as the location partly because it served a broad region, especially for underprivileged communities in the South. In 1962, St. Jude opened its doors, and Danny poured his energy into it. At that time, certain childhood diseases like leukemia and Hodgkin's lymphoma were practically death sentences. St. Jude attacked these diseases with cutting-edge research, advanced therapies, and a collaborative approach that freely shared discoveries with other hospitals. Danny leveraged his celebrity, calling on stars from Hollywood, the music industry, and even sports to stage benefit shows like the annual Shower of Stars. He donated proceeds from his Maxwell House coffee commercials and even sold his share of the Miami Dolphins football team to further fund the hospital. Over the decades, survival rates for childhood cancer soared, thanks in part to the pioneering work at St. Jude. Throughout his life, Danny Thomas accumulated countless accolades, honorary doctorates, awards from philanthropic and civic organizations, and even a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yet the recognition that moved him most deeply was the Congressional Gold Medal, presented to him by President Ronald Reagan in 1985. It was a formal acknowledgement not only of Danny's comedic achievements, but also of the countless children who received hope and medical care at St. Jude. By the late 1980s, Danny had mostly stepped back from the hectic pace of show business. He spent more time traveling, speaking to donors and medical professionals about the hospital's developments, and continuing to refine his philanthropic outreach. His comedic colleagues viewed him with a rare mix of admiration and gratitude. He not only paved the way for future sitcom stars to embrace more personal comedic narratives, but also set a high standard for what celebrities could accomplish in the realm of charitable work. Although many public figures support charitable causes, Danny Thomas poured himself into his mission with unwavering dedication, forging a lasting institution that saved lives. On February 6, 1991, Danny Thomas passed away at age 79 from a heart attack. His death shook Hollywood, the comedic community, and families who had grown up watching Make Room for Daddy or had benefited from St. Jude's care. His funeral attracted well-known entertainers, political figures, and philanthropic leaders who came to pay final respects. But the final word on Danny's legacy wasn't about sorrow. It was about gratitude. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital continues its critical work, staying true to Danny's vision. No child is denied treatment because of a family's inability to pay. His children, including Marlo Thomas, carry on that philanthropic tradition, ensuring that the hospital remains at the forefront of pediatric medicine. Sitcom producers and showrunners still cite Make Room for Daddy as a blueprint for mixing family themes with comedic storylines. Today, visiting St. Jude or re-watching Make Room for Daddy episodes can feel like stepping into a simpler time, yet also one that reminds us how entertainment and altruism can intersect. Younger generations may only vaguely know his name, perhaps through references in pop culture or because they see Marlo Thomas continuing the philanthropic mission. But a deeper look at the comedic lineage reveals that many modern sitcom patterns, witty banter, anchored by strong family units, trace back in part to Danny Thomas. The comedic arcs that invite emotional investment culminating in a heartfelt punchline are a direct inheritance from his style of narrative building. If you found Danny's story inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tributes to the legends who shaped history. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.